What made you become interested in writing and how it is therapeutic?
I got into this research just backwards, so that I discovered years ago by accident that having early traumatic experiences was associated with higher illness rates, especially people who had traumatic experiences that they kept secret, which led me to the question of if you ask people to tell their secrets, would their health improved? And so what I ended up doing was a study many years ago where we brought people into the laboratory, had half of them write about a major trauma that they had kept secret versus have them write about superficial topics, and found that writing about traumas was associated with health improvements. And that kind of led me down the path I've followed over the last 20 years.
And what kind of health improvements did you see?
In our first studies, we got permission from students to get access to their student health records. And we found that people went to the student health center at about half the rates as people in our control conditions after writing. And then in the years that followed, we looked at other measures, and other labs have. So we started looking at markers of immune function, so we would draw blood in our studies. And then later other people started looking at all kinds of things, looking at CD4 counts or white blood cell counts and markers of aggressiveness of the immune system among people with AIDS. Other people looked at various biological markers of asthma, arthritis, cancer. So there have probably been now over 200 studies done looking at writing, and maybe 10 or 20% of those look at various health measures.
Along the same lines, have you heard of postsecret.com by chance?
I have.
Do you think this kind of relates to that?
Well, it does. This raises a really interesting question of when people talk about traumatic experience. And a website like postsecret.com is interesting because a lot of the people are writing about things that they can't tell anybody. And in many ways, that's what our research was when we started it, which was this opportunity to write about upsetting experiences. We had people write for 3 or 4 days, depending on the study, for 15, maybe 20 minutes a time on each of those days. And that was all. So we didn't have people write forever. It was just a fixed amount of time.
What did you find out about the study? Did it help people mostly? Or?
Overwhelmingly, people say that it's beneficial. And virtually nobody says it's bad. So there seems to be a method that's very simple and people find benefit. I think it gives them the opportunity to kind of stand back and see where they are in life and kind of put things together that may have been really complex, as most traumas are.
Kind of before I turn on the recorder, we were talking about how I suggest that maybe highly creative people often had traumatic experiences. What do you think of that? Is that not quite right?
First of all, the whole concept of creativity is a very difficult one to grasp. And there have been some arguments that highly creative people have had really tortured childhoods, things like that. But I don't know of any strong research to suggest that creativity is in fact related to having traumatic childhoods. In fact, as I recall, some of the most certainly successful, productive people, and I think that often co-varies with creativity, often have had surprisingly or reasonably happy childhoods as opposed to tortured. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not sure that tortured versus happy childhoods is a strong predictor of creativity. Certain types of creativity, like poetry writing, might be related to a tortured childhood. But I don't think that's true of other kinds of creativity. I see that you've got a picture of John Lennon.
Oh, yes.
And we've just published an article on Lennon versus McCartney.
Really?
And they're interesting because Lennon had a very unhappy childhood, whereas McCartney had a very happy one, even though his mother died when he was young. And then that raises the question of who's more creative, Lennon or McCartney. And I think many people, in a knee-jerk way, say it's Lennon. But the reality is, if you go through and do an analysis of songs, McCartney is actually at least during his Beatle years, was far more varied in the types of lyrics, the types of music than was Lennon. So there you go. There's another example where tortured childhood isn't a prerequisite for creativity.